What I want to do today is give you a map, a model of the world based on 5 big flows. This is based on work that I've done for a startup group out of Israel called Wikistrat. And I'll explain that in a second. Most of the time we look at the world map, we tend to place the Atlantic in the middle because we've had a transatlantic era for so long we can't think of another kind of era. But of course we're in a trans-Pacific era now. And that's the map I'm going to use primarily throughout this presentation, except in those situations where it's just inconvenient. Wikistrat is a startup out of Israel. Its 2 founders are here today listening. They're over for a bunch of talks with a variety of people. The way we like to portray it is, in a nutshell, it's kind of Facebook meets Wikipedia, creating an online community of strategists. The Wikipedia part is the online globalization model. And what we're trying to build is a massively multiplayer online consultancy, which we think is the future. And we've already talked some luminaries into it, like Kaplan, Dan Pipes, Dimitri Trenin, Michael Schur. I'm not sure I'll get along with all of them, but I think it'll be fun. So what we've done on this GLOMOD, as we call it, is we've mapped out the big flows. And they stem from work I did all the way back with Cantor Fitzgerald before 9/11 struck, looking at how globalization unfolds. We look at where resources are in abundance, and we make a simple argument. Just like gravity and water, they're going to flow to regions where they're not in abundance. Okay? And America's job primarily, if it's interested in doing it, is making sure those flows happen under the safest possible terms. So I'm going to give you the people flow here now. Bit of a legacy. Russians going back to Russia, Easterners going to the West. So Cold War. Obvious big Latino flow. You got Africans heading into Europe, heading into South Africa, chasing economic opportunity. You got Asians going everywhere, and that's a big hint as to who's the integrating agent of choice in this era. You got the Chinese spreading throughout Southeast Asia, big presence in Africa, and of course the one we tend to obsess over, the movement of Muslims. There's your big flows. What I like to point out, almost all of it is from the gap to the core, except for the big integrators right now, which are the Asians. Another big hint. Biggest overseas missionary community in the world, not the United States. Anybody want to guess? Korea? South Korea. Okay? So think about it. Religion always burns hottest on the frontiers. So who are the last into globalization? Who are the ones who tend to replicate? That's what I'm talking about when I discuss the Asians in general. So we're going to talk a little bit about the flow of people in terms of time and the population aging process that we're witnessing in this century, which is the dominant trend of the century. I like to point out science fiction because I like to read a lot of it, hope to write some someday. Here's one of my favorite movies, just saw it again on Blu-ray. Soylent Green. They actually talk about New York, 40 million people, don't have enough food because of greenhouse gases. This is a climate change movie in 1970. Can't feed enough, got too many people, got to eat the people. 2022. 2022. So you don't have long. Here's my favorite recent version, Children of Men. 2027, 5 years later, we run out of babies. We go from eating them to I can't get a woman pregnant. Now what happens in that time frame? Because those are fears of today packaged in tomorrow. I mean, what the fear on the right was about was really the fear of lots of Muslims moving into Europe, Europeans not having enough babies, Japanese disappearing as a society, the Greeks not having babies, Italians not having babies, that kind of stuff. Realize you're pretty flat on population until you hit the Industrial Revolution. When we did Soylent Green back here, it was all population bomb, okay? When we start figuring out this thing, we're already realizing we're topping out in terms of humanity about mid-century, thanks to the Indians and the Chinese. The one-child policy in China, and frankly, a lot of aborted babies in India, thanks to ultrasound. So we move into an entirely different realm, ahistorical. Look at the numbers from 2000, about 6 billion people. These are the ones we love because they work. Back then we had more going in than coming out, ideal. Look what happens by 2050. We hit this match point. These are equal, first time in history, totally ahistoric. The wolves should hunt them down and kill them. I won't be saying that in 2050. But I mean, it's not natural. It's just not natural. So 500 million old people now, 4 times as many in 2050. That's a very different world. That's a cranky world. That's a send your food back world. It's not a world you have a lot of wars in, though. Here's the PSR. My wife and I have 3 biologicals. That means we had sex. Then we adopted 3 girls from abroad, 1 Chinese, 2 Ethiopians. Why? We were worried about our potential support ratio. Plus, I read that book by Fareed Zakaria, my old classmate, and I was like, holy God, post-American, I got to start hedging my bets. So 1 Chinese, 2 Ethiopians. You never know. Go back to 1950. Look at the potential support ratio. Globally, fantastic. That's 12 to 1. Industrialization barely spreads across the second half of the 20th century. Why? You know, so have not. Too busy fighting the Cold War, all that. Look what happens by 2050, though. Globalization really takes off, moves everybody down the industrialization path. You're down to 4 to 1. That is dramatically different. And it's going to be highly skewed. Not surprisingly, it's going to correspond to my new core, old core gap breakdown. My new core barely outpaced the elders. The new core basically going to be the middle, and lots of babies over here. So no surprise, you're going to have tremendous pressures and flows in terms of bodies heading into the old core. You're going to let them in because you're going to want somebody to turn you over in your hospital bed. Change the colostomy bag. And you're going to send jobs to the gap, just like you've been sending them to China. So pay me now, pay me later. That's the reality in terms of demographics. Let's look at a part of the world that's experiencing a lot of revolutionary change, and I'll tell you it's mostly about demographics. Center of gravity in terms of demographics, Arab world right now in the early 20s. What do early 20 people want? They want a lot of things. Are they reasonable about it? No. But what they definitely want, especially if you're a male in Egypt, you want a job so you can get some money so you can get married. You need a dowry to get married, so you need a job to pay the dowry. You want to piss off young men in society, you give them not enough opportunity to pursue that lifestyle. What happens, though, between now and 2030 is Middle Ages in the Middle East. So that's the transition and the expectations that are being processed now. You can put them in college. They did that in Egypt. They do that in Iran. That just gets them out 5 years later, more pissed off and more ambitious. So this guy is the apocryphal story. Bachelor's in computer science. He's selling fruit on the street, gets hassled, can't pay the bribe, gets all the stuff taken away. So he does a suicide bomber, except it's just himself. And it's so symbolic, this guy's smart enough to realize he needs to show up to the hospital room. About 6 weeks later, gone. Arab Spring. One guy can't get processed in terms of his dreams. He feels disconnected. He's not interested in Al-Qaeda, does his thing, changes history on that basis. That is a super empowered individual. So we talk about the usual suspects for revolution. We're going to blame it on radical Islam. We're going to blame it on this guy. Not anymore. We're going to blame it on the Big Bang Theory. We're going to say Iran's meddling. We're going to say it's all about oil. We're going to blame it on Israel. We're going to blame it on the former colonial masters going into Libya. These guys with their Wahhabism spreading around. Everybody's usual suspects. None of them crucial. I'll tell you, this is a demographically driven from below, externally driven globalization process. A couple guys at Harvard want to get laid 10 years ago. Change history on that basis. But let's be honest, most of history gets changed on that basis. These guys, nonviolent protest, helped take down Milosevic. Now they teach it over the web. The Democracy Foundation in the United States funds them. Okay? Who put him in charge? Nobody. Nobody put that guy in charge either. And yet he's fomented a lot of unrest. United States, nobody put the Fed in charge, but when we had the bubble crash, they flooded the system with money, exported inflation. America just so happened to sell a lot of arms throughout the Middle East right before the revolution started to hit. All part of the plan. China wants to eat more beef. That changes everything. because it sucks in crops from around the world, while America takes 1/3 of its corn crop and puts it into ethanol. All this drives up the price of food throughout the Middle East, doubles it in the last year. Okay, nobody in charge of this process. It's just globalization mowing its way through history. So when I look at how the Middle East is going to evolve, this is what I focus on. Not Libya, which is in the news right now. It's all about Egypt to me. It's about these guys who are another key pillar. Emphasize these guys are a key pillar, but they're not Arabs, and they're not Sunni. Of course, we got the Turks, who have some serious ambitions. I see Al-Qaeda playing a certain role, primarily because these two players are the original targets, and they're both in play right now, thanks to the franchise movements. Okay? But when I look at Egypt, and we ran a simulation at Wikistrat on this, it's very interesting. We see three big paths. We could be looking at in Indonesia about 1975, about 10 years after the year of living dangerously. If we're lucky, it moves more in the direction of Turkey over time. The bad scenario, we'll call that Pakistan, kind of a breakdown. The ugly one, it moves more in the direction of Islamic fervor and becomes opposition, rejectionist to globalization. Egypt is key, though, because this is the center of a lot of Arab culture. It sets a lot of standards. And it's been offline for a long time under Mubarak. So understand, this is the big rivalry. It's never been about Israel with Iran. It's always been about these guys. This is a huge rivalry. It's held latent. These guys put their arms around these guys like Brazil puts its arm around Venezuela. Okay? They're not really friends. And they're fighting it out through economics primarily in this part of the world right now. And then when these guys come back on stage, they don't recognize these guys as the head of Arab culture. Go figure. And so there's going to be some real effort to reclaim that territory here. Now the nightmare scenario, Iran is running Iraq. I think that's an overblown fear. Iran triggers all sorts of dangerous ideas and pathways here. Everybody gangs up on this guy. Israel gets caught in the crossfire. This is why Egypt is so important, though. If Egypt does well, then we're looking at what I describe as the axis of good. 3 serious democracies. Here's 4 going on 5 elections. Hopefully good progress there. This is a very good model in my mind. That changes the whole dialogue on the Middle East because we've been spending our time with these 2 plus Israel, and none of these 3 listen to us. I'm not saying those guys are going to listen to us. I'm going to say they're going to be more along the lines of what we want to see in terms of internal and regional developments. Why I think that's important. Iran's getting a bomb probably not much later than the latest Israeli estimate, 2015. Israel, of course, has a lot of bombs. I think these guys cannot let these 2 meet at a table engineered by outside regional powers, great powers, United States, China, India, and others. So they're going to have to get one too. Maybe these guys will have to get one as well. I think we're looking at the process of processing the Middle East through much the same experience we had in Europe, say in the late 1950s, early 1960s, meaning Berlin-like crises, maybe even a Cuban Missile-like crisis, but eventually we're going to get some sort of packaging for an above, looking down security system for the region. So I don't fear nuclear weapons, and I don't fear Iran's reach for them. I think it's going to set in motion what we actually need after passing out Nobel Peace Prizes for the last 50 years, and basically get nowhere trying to build up security from below on Arab-Israeli relations.